Welcome back to Foundations of Christian Thought and Practice. We're now at Theme 6, God is not Santa Claus. Remember, we're in the prophetic books. We've talked about the idea, we've talked actually about 3 genres. There is narrative, and then we dealt with poetry, the wisdom books, 5 books there, and now we're in the prophetic books. As we move into this 6th theme, let me give you a little bit more of a context for prophecy in the Hebrew Bible. In the first place, there are 15 prophetic books. There are 12 minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, some of the prophets that you may know, and then 3 major prophets. We have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. They are called the major prophets. You're going to love this. They're called the major prophets because they're big. So 12 minor prophets, 3 major prophets, and so we have 15 prophets in the Hebrew Bible. These prophets basically span all the way from, and this is very debatable, but they span all the way from Moses to Malachi and to Haggai. These are what we call the post-exilic prophets. I do want you to know that these prophets revolve around the date 586 BCE. And I'm taking you back again to what we talked about in the beginning of this semester. What happened in 586 BCE? Recall that I said that this is probably the central date for the Hebrew Bible. This is when the Babylonians came down to Judah, came down to the capital city, Jerusalem, and they destroyed Jerusalem. Just pretty much, as far as we know, they razed it to the ground. They destroyed the temple, and then they took the movers and the shakers back, the people who were the intelligentsia, the political people, the wealthy, the creators, the religious people. They took them back to Babylon. That's why this is called the Babylonian captivity. And so in many regards, since the Hebrew Bible was really compiled and edited in the beginning, probably around somewhere 450 BCE, before the Common Era, even though books were written long before this, we finally get into what we call the Canon around 450, and then of course this is added to increasingly until we get into the 1st century CE. And so these prophets are grappling with 586 BCE. They're grappling with the question, and I want you to know this term, they're grappling with the question, the issue of what we call theodicy. Theodicy. Theodicy is a word that means is God righteous? And in fact, how could God be righteous if these certain things happen? How could God be righteous when God is all-powerful and yet bad things happen to good people? Remember, we saw that in the book of Job. And so the prophets are grappling with the theodicy of 586 BCE. Even though these people, the Jews, are God's chosen people, and even though they are loved by God, they're the chosen ones, why did they suffer such a catastrophic event? Why were they almost completely destroyed? Why was their temple destroyed? You understand, back in the ancient Near East, to destroy the temple is a reflection, it's a bad reflection on the God of that temple. That means the God of that temple could not defend his or her own temple. And so 586 BCE is a deep existential question. It questions their faith. And the prophets are trying to grapple with this. And so the prophets are divided into 3 sections or 3 terms related to this 586 BCE date. You have the pre-exilic. Notice the word exile. The exile begins in 586 BCE, a little bit earlier for some individuals, but about 586 BCE, the exile begins. And so you have pre-exilic prophets who are warning the Israelites, if you don't follow the commands of God, if you don't worship God alone, remember monotheism, and if you don't take care of the widow, the orphan, and the alien, exile is coming. And so they're predicting this, and they're calling people to action. They're calling people to repent and change. Then we've got a few prophets who live in the exile. So we have pre-exilic prophets and we have exilic prophets. And the exilic prophets are trying to handle the situation right there in that moment. And so Jeremiah is by some considered to be an exilic prophet. Actually, he's the prophet he's the only one who predicts it, lives through it, and then looks back on it. Ezekiel is probably the most famous exilic prophet. Ezekiel is a prophet not in Jerusalem, not in Judah. He's a prophet in Babylon. And in fact, part of his message is to say, look, this is God's will. This is just not a mistake. And I know you want to go home. You want to get back home, but you might as well get used to this because you're going to be here for a while. In fact, you're going to be here for 70 years at the completion of this whole exilic experience. So you have pre-exilic prophets, exilic prophets, and then you have post-exilic prophets. And these are the prophets who some are back in the land of Judah and they're rebuilding, and they're rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, they're rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, they're rebuilding the temple. So pre-exilic, exilic, and post-exilic, all of these revolve around this tragic, terrible date of 586 BCE. Now, our sixth theme relates deeply to this. Our sixth theme is God is not Santa Claus, and this may be the strangest one that you've encountered so far. This would be a very important theme to me as we now move out of the Old Testament, out of the Hebrew Bible, into the New Testament. This is my sixth and final theme that I think is very important. What in the world am I talking about here? Well, if theme 5 deals with ethical actions, how do we treat others? Do we love ourselves and do we love our God, and do we love our neighbor? Do we take care of the people who cannot take care of themselves? Theme 6 is basically addressing the issue of idolatry. And so remember, I'm going to go back to theme 3. God is one and incomprehensible. Remember the Mezuzah to this day that is pretty much in every Jewish home and definitely is in every Jewish synagogue. If you ever go to Jerusalem, you'll see mezuzahs all over the place. Remember, the mezuzah is the box that contains Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, our God is one. Well, many people who know a little bit about the Hebrew Bible, they think that monotheism came along, remember Moses in Exodus chapter 3, and boom, everybody is a monotheist. Not true. In fact, historically, we know that monotheism took about 600, maybe 400, anywhere from 400 to 600 years to take hold, to become a fact for the Jews. And in reality, monotheism did not become a practice until after the exile in the post-exilic period. And so the individuals who lived in Israel and Judah constantly struggled with polytheism. They constantly struggled with monolatry. And in fact, in many regards, an individual who, say, lived around 640 BCE, that individual wanted to cover all the bases. So he or she would worship Yahweh, but, you know, I should also probably worship Baal, the storm god. I want to cover all bases. And the prophets will despise this. This will be idolatry to them. And I want you to notice this. Idolatry in the Hebrew Bible doesn't mean loving something. Idolatry in the Hebrew Bible, it means to find life where there is no life. And so if you'll go back to the concept of monotheism, remember I told you the big difference between monotheism and monolatry. Monotheism says there is only one God. Monolatry says there are many gods, but this is the best God. The prophets hated that idea. That was still idolatrous to them. And so the prophets, in particular Isaiah, is going to call to the exclusive worship of Yahweh alone. And so they're very concerned about idolatry. Now you're like, what does this have to do with Santa Claus? All right, now watch this. There are idols in the Old Testament that would be false gods, other gods. And then, and Jeremiah is our prophet here. And in fact, if you want to spend some time in the chapter that I'm going back to here, it's Jeremiah chapter 7. This is called Jeremiah's Temple Sermon. There were Israelites who did worship Yahweh alone, but then they made Yahweh into an idol. They basically, remember me talking about in theme 3, God is one and incomprehensible? All of a sudden there were people who said, we kind of got God figured out. And in fact, we have God on our side. And so what I'm talking about with this theme is essentially having God, worshiping God, serving God in such a way that guarantees my life. All right? There's the clue. Worshiping God in such a way that God guarantees my life. It's basically saying that I've figured God out and God is on my side, and I drive around with a bumper sticker that says God bless America, and I do believe God bless America, but it's actually believing that I am right, I figured out God, and everybody else is doomed. This is the point where Jeremiah, Isaiah, also Jonah, this becomes very important. I love the story of Jonah. We just don't have much time to get to it. But if you get a chance, go and read the book of Jonah, 4 short chapters. Jonah is a Jewish prophet who basically thinks that God is just the God of the Jews. And so he comes up against this, and he gets furious when God forgives the people who should never be forgiven. The Assyrians, what are called the Nazis of their days, of that day. God forgives them, and then Jonah is absolutely furious because to Jonah, in Jonah's thinking, he's figured out God, and God is only the God of me. And so what I mean by this 6th theme is the prophets are coming up against the idea that you can't make God into an idol. When you make God into an idol, then you have now lost God. If you say in a very definite way that I found God, the prophet would come along and say, no, you didn't. There's still more to God. And so we see this in Jeremiah chapter 7. Remember, I called this the Temple Sermon. Jeremiah, and this is so controversial, and it almost got him killed back then. Jeremiah is going to cry out against the people, in particular, the religious people. You see, when we get to this 6th theme, it's not the nations who are a problem, it's the religious people who are a problem. They have figured out God, and because they've figured out God, they don't take care of the widow, the orphan, and the alien. They basically think that their life is guaranteed. They can actually become comfortable in their faith. And Jeremiah is going to call out against this. Jeremiah is going to say, the Babylonians are coming. The Babylonians are coming. They're at the gates, and the religious people would say, no, it's okay. This is not going to happen. This is before 586. They're going to say, no, this is okay. God is on our side. And Jeremiah is going to say, no, you think you've figured God out, but you really haven't. You think God is your Santa Claus, but God is not a Santa Claus. God is a profound mystery. And so this 6th theme, we see prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Jonah, Micah, who are basically saying, your religion is not to figure out God. Your religion is to realize that God is a profound mystery. And in the midst of that, how are you supposed to act towards other people? This is in Micah chapter 6. You are supposed to be humble, do the right thing, and love mercy. These prophets are basically saying the real actions that are important to Yahweh are justice, mercy, and being humble, not being arrogant, thinking that God is on our side. And so now as we leave the Old Testament, I want you to realize that the call is extremely ethical. What does it mean to treat people well? What does it mean to be just to the people in my world? What does it mean to be open and vulnerable, to be merciful to other people? And then even though if I am religious, that means I should be humble. And then it also opens the door. And I'll wrap it up with this. It opens the door to God not just being, Yahweh not just being the God of the Jews, but Yahweh being the God of the universe, the God of all the earth. Jonah again opens this door. God will come to Jonah and say, why are you so angry? This is in Jonah chapter 4. Why are you so angry? What is it to you that I love the Assyrians and I want to save the Assyrians? Who are you to judge me? And so now as we leave the Old Testament, I want you to see that there were Jewish prophets. This is very important. There were Jewish prophets who began to open the door to Yahweh, not only being the God of the Jews, but also the God of the Gentiles.